welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're in our series on hunting controversies and solutions. This episode bridges a controversy in our last episode of the year, what it takes to be a truly great hunter, which is our season finale. It does this because this episode includes both someone that many feel is one of the best whitetail hunters ever, with probably the biggest controversy ever as well. That's Mitch Rompola. We cover both and what three people that knew him firsthand say about that infamous 1998 buck, and also cover some strange hunting techniques he used that I'd never heard about. And yes, I knocked on Mitch's door in an attempt to get an interview. I will reveal what happened, and will finally answer one big question that's been floating around for years regarding that 1998 buck. My first interview is with John Omer of Michigan's scoring group CBM. We're at a show for this, so excuse the background noise. What is the exact nature of John's relationship to Mitch? And I think it's important to understand relationships as we analyze some of our interviews and to keep this in mind. Why does John say that Mitch told him and some other people to stand down? And what does John say about seeing an infamous shed, which another guest will also comment on later? Okay, so let's get to the podcast and up your Deer IQ. All right, I'm here with John Omer, who's with CBM, or Commemorative Bucks of Michigan. And John, just tell us a little bit about, so how long have you worked with CBM? And then you knew Mitch Rompola, and so right. I've been talking about that. So how did you know Mitch? Just tell us a little bit about that.
I first met him when he scored my deer for Pope and Young. I'd already had him entered in the Commemorative Bucks Michigan book, and the measurer said, well, these qualify for Pope and Young. You'd better take them to the Deer Spectacular and have somebody there that's certified for Pope and Young to enter them in that book for you. So I did, and it ended up being Mitch. And I was just blown away with the display. I mean, we had like 400 racks and shoulder mounts on the wall. It was just an amazing place. Wow, I was just dumbfounded by the magnitude of it. Anyway, I became a member of some Commemorative Bucks when I entered by deer, and then I entered the ones in Pope and Young, and I got to know Mitch when he scored the deer for me for Pope and Young. And then within the next year, I found out I got the magazine from Commemorative Bucks, and I saw an article that they were looking for measurers. So I thought, well, wouldn't that be cool to be able to handle all these deer that everybody gets? And so I applied to become a measurer, and I got accepted and went to the class, and Mitch was the teacher. He was our instructor. And it was funny. He went all the way around the room and had everybody stand up and say what county they were from and introduce themselves. And everyone else said, where they were from, and he said, that's good. We needed a new measure, or we need a measure in that county. We don't have one. When we got to me, I had just become a life member just before the class, and when he come to me, I said, I was from St. Clair County. He said, well, we've already got a measure in St. Clair County, but since you're a life member, we can't get any more dues out of you. We might as well put you to work. And that was 32 years ago last January.
So basically, you learned from Mitch, right?
Mitch was our teacher, right. And whenever we had a question, he was the one we would call. And yep.
All right. So how well would you say you knew him, and how long did you kind of work with him before, like, the 1998 deer?
Well, it was January of 91 that I became the measurer, and so from 91 to 98, that entire time I was in contact with him all the time.
Gotcha.
The last time I heard from him was when my wife passed away in 2006. I got a sympathy card from him and his girlfriend. So.
Gotcha. So why do you? Well, first of all, you knew him, right? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the whole controversy and all that, and everything that went down with that buck in 1998, and why he kind of disappeared?
Yeah. Well, when it first occurred, there was a bunch of us had shirts made up. I've still got it at home. It says, "We support Mitch." It was a T-shirt with his picture with the buck on it. and the famous one that was in all the papers. And anyway, he told us that he wanted us to stand down, that he was getting a lot of flack from a company that owned, it was an advertising company that owned the rights to the Milo Hanson buck. And what ended up happening was that company, they had millions of dollars invested in shirts and hats and books and all this stuff, and they threatened to sue him if he tried to enter that deer in the record book, because then it would be the new #1 for world record, and all their money would be down the drain. So being a multi-million-dollar company, and he was a manager of an apartment complex, a maintenance man basically, he didn't have the money to fight a big lawsuit, so he just said ignore it, and that's why he told us to drop it. And he got out of the picture of everything because he didn't want to hurt the club.
So if I understand correctly, CBM is different than Boone and Crockett, right?
Right.
So he could have entered in CBM but still not been the world record.
Right, and then if he had done that, there would have been the question, like, why not put it in the bigger books? And he just didn't want any of the aggression or whatever you want to call it that he was receiving. He didn't want that focused on commemorative bucks.
So kind of turning the page here, so a lot of people at least consider Mitch a really great hunter.
Oh boy.
What are some things you know about him that people might not know about, like just things he would do and hunting tactics? Because I highly doubt I'm going to get an interview with him. I might try, but what are the things guys don't know about him and things he did to hunt?
He told us one time his average day to go on a hunt, he would get all his stuff in the truck, his bow, his backpack, all his gear, and he'd go to a local coffee shop, and get a coffee and a couple of donuts, a snack, and pay for it, leave it on the counter, and go to the back of the shop like he was going to the bathroom, sneak out the back door, jump in a truck with a buddy, and then would take him to his actual hunting spot, because people would follow him all the time trying to find out where he was. But he had a 6 square mile area around in the state land in Traverse City, and every day off he ever had, he was in that property. And in the spring and summer, he would carry a bag of fertilizer over his shoulder, and he fertilized oak trees. And it's a little known practice, but I mean, there are some people who have talked about it. But you fertilize an oak tree for a few years, and you can double the acorn production. They're bigger, they're sweeter, and within a year or two, all the deer in the neighborhood know where that tree is. So you increase your chances. Well, he would pick out an oak tree that had at least 2 or even 3 different places to put a tree stand. And so whatever way the wind was from, he had a way to get in and get in the stand without being winded from that tree.
Interesting.
Another thing he used to do, he would save the tongue from a deer that he shot. He would mark on a Ziploc bag what it was, where he got it, and the date. And then a couple of years down the road, if he had a deer that was just giving him the slip every chance it could, he just couldn't get it, he would take one of those tongues out of the freezer bag, lick the licking branch with this tongue, and this buck would come along. Okay, this is somebody new, like, who thinks they're moving into my area, and just enough to make the deer make a mistake. And like the big one that he did get, the year before he shot it, he shot a 9-point that was narrow. It was only like 21 inches wide inside, and it scored 168 net. And he didn't really want one that small, but it was a very aggressive deer. It was younger than the big one, and he was afraid that it would kill the big one because of the narrow rack, and the big one was really wide. He showed us a picture, a trail camera picture of where this deer walked between 2 saplings, and then he showed another picture of the same 2 saplings with the scratches with a yardstick, a 36-inch wooden yardstick, and they didn't touch. Those 2 points that went way out, they were over 3 feet wide. And the year before he shot the deer, he brought trail camera pictures of it to the Deer Spectacular for us all to see, and he had the shed from it. He was really keeping track of it. And that shed, I had my hands on it. The thing had a 6.5-inch base that year, and the one shed scored 96 inches.
So that shed, I think I've heard a lot of different stories about that. He showed it to different people,
Right.
probably at that event.
Yep.
And I think there's been some speculation recently of people saying, "Oh, the shed looked like super old and all this stuff." So,
No,
what are your takes on that?
That I had it in my hands, and that was like a fresh drop. I mean, it was like I've seen sheds over 32 years of scoring. I do a lot of sheds for people, and you can tell the age on them. And like when they first break off, the perforation marks of where they break off the pedicle it's very fresh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and once you handle a few, you can tell because they get weathered, they get rubbed a little bit or smoothed out. These were just. It looked like he pulled it off the deer, live because it was really, really fresh. Yep.
All right, so now we go to well-known outdoor writer Richard P. Smith, who wrote a now-famous article for Outdoor Life this past year talking about Mitch and this buck. This came about because a score sheet surfaced online, supposedly from Mitch's 1998 buck. Pay attention to what Richard says about the missing 30-minute video of the recovery that very few other people have seen. I will also include a clip of this recovery, which is circulated around online a lot, and pay attention to Mitch's reaction and other various details of the video, like how the antlers and skull actually look, which is where a lot of controversy stems from. Tell us a little bit about that. So what, your background, I guess, your relationship with Mitch, and just what, kind of why you wrote that article at that time.
Well, what prompted the article at that time, Adam, was the fact that the score sheet for Mitch's deer surfaced just prior to that. And it hadn't been released publicly prior to that. The three people who measured the rack for state records maintained by Commemorative Bucks of Michigan were the only ones who knew what most of those measurements were. The spread on the antlers was widely publicized at the time he got the deer. And I think beam lengths maybe, but most of the measurements were unknown to most members of the public. Yeah. So the release of the score sheet from the antlers is what prompted the recent article on Outdoor Life. However, I've known Mitch since the 1980s, long before he killed that buck in 1998 that scored 216 and 5/8, according to the panel of three measurers who measured it. And I've written a number of articles about Mitch prior to 1998. He got the state record typical bow kill in 1985. I knew him prior to that and interviewed him about that kill at the time and had written a number of other articles about Mitch. And I knew him personally. I was working with Commemorative Bucks of Michigan when they started and wrote and edited the first three record books for Commemorative Bucks of Michigan. Mitch was a scoring chairman, and I edited Commemorative Bucks of Michigan's newsletter for a number of years also. And Mitch contributed some copy for the newsletter, so I worked with him on that. So I knew Mitch fairly well and knew he was an excellent hunter prior to that kill in 1998. And had he entered it, that would have been a new state record, typical in all categories, obviously. Mm-hmm. As everybody knows, it would be a potential world record had Mitch decided to enter it in Boone and Crockett. However, the Boone and Crockett buck he got in 1985 that was the state record typical bow kill for many years, he didn't enter that deer in Boone and Crockett because he chose not to, and he had problems with Boone and Crockett records. So he didn't plan on entering it in the buck he got in 98 in Boone and Crockett either, for the same reason. And he knew it wouldn't be classified as a world record, not entering it in Boone and Crockett. He was very familiar with the scoring systems.
So why do you think there's so much, because there's so much interest in the story still, and there's, all over the internet, there's Facebook groups and all this dedicated to this particular deer, right? Why do you think there's so much interest, and why do you think there's so much debate on it that's still going on? And it's been a long time.
It's interesting. You got to know the background behind some of the biggest deer killed in Michigan. Craig Calderon killed a typical that scored more than Mitch's typical bow kill. I forget what year it was, 86. Not too many years after Mitch got his buck in 85. It scored in the 190s, and he entered it in state records. However, a ticket that he had received, Craig had received for shining deer with a gun in his vehicle, I think when he was in college, surfaced. And according to commemorative bucks of Michigan bylaws, that game law violation disqualified Craig's deer for a period of 3 years. So Craig's big typical bow kill was taken out of state records. And Craig blamed Mitch for that deer being removed from the records. However, because Mitch had the current state record, he disqualified himself for making a decision on Craig's deer. But Craig obviously didn't know that. And as soon as Mitch killed the bigger deer in 1998, he started rumors about the deer being fake and Mitch making a set of antlers and putting him in place of the antlers that were on the deer. And that snowballed big time. Craig has a deer museum near Jackson, and a lot of people visited there. A lot of people knew about Craig's big buck that was taken out of state records, and it just snowballed from there. Craig didn't see the deer. He knew nothing about the killing of that deer other than what was publicized. Mitch knew what he had accomplished, and he did radio interviews, TV interviews, magazine interviews, newspaper interviews when he killed that deer to share his story with the public because he knew what he accomplished. Mm-hmm. And he had been hunting that deer for 3 years. I never saw the deer myself, but I talked to the 3 people who measured it. Gary Berger was a friend of mine. I knew him through affiliation with Commemorative Bucks of Michigan as well. Gary inspected the skull plate and the antlers, and so did the other 2 people who measured it. I talked to a game warden who saw the deer before Mitch skinned it. The game warden was a friend of Mitch's, and Mitch called him to tell him about him finally getting that deer. And he had been telling this warden about the 3-year quest to get that deer. A game warden saw the deer intact before it was skinned, inspected it. No doubt in his mind it was a legitimate deer. The 3 people who scored it, same thing. There shouldn't have been any question. And in fact, Mitch documented the recovery of that deer on video. He shot the deer, went home, got his video camera, went back to the stand where he shot it from, started recording, and shot a video of following the blood trail and finally finding that deer. I'm one of the few people who have seen that entire video. It was like 20-some minutes long. There's been clips on the internet of the recovery, but that's only a brief part of the whole thing that Mitch shot. There's no question in my mind, it never has been, about the legitimacy of this deer, and there's more factual support for this deer than most that are in Boone and Crockett records.
So real quick on that then, so the 26 minutes that most people have only seen a small clip of this, right? Probably what I've seen, what everybody's seen has been a clip of this where he's basically walking up to the deer, exactly. The down deer, right?
I knew he was big. Look how wide he is. Oh, good sized deer too. Holy criminy. Yeah, that's about the angle. Oh man. Oh shit. Oh, is he beautiful. Man, oh man. Oh, them antlers are just, golly, to cover them. Man, that's gotta be, the spread's over 3 feet, I'll bet you. I got a tape measure back at the truck. Anyway. I don't know what he's been rubbing. Something.
Do you remember, can you share with us then, because most people would never have heard this, what else was on that clip that you remember?
Well, he started from the stand explaining this is where he shot the deer and where it came up and where it was standing when he shot it. And then as he's following the blood trail, he mentions where he had a previous stand. He mentioned scrapes along the way and rubs. And when he got to a point where he finally saw the downed deer, the excitement in his voice was obvious. It wasn't something you could fake. I'm a hunter myself. I've been with many hunters who've walked up on deer they shot. There's no question in my mind the excitement in his voice was real. He did not get to the deer previously, change antlers on the deer, and then reshoot him walking up on it. The arrow was still in the deer. I've written a number of chapters in books about Mitch's 1998 deer. Book 4 of Great Michigan Deer Tales, the first chapter in that book, explains what he said and showed in that video. And it also covers some of the bucks that Mitch killed after 1998. Book 3 of Great Michigan Deer Tales, the first 2 chapters in the book, provide lengthy coverage documenting the validity of that deer.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so there's a lot going on in this whole story, right? With the conflicting interest maybe with the Calderon character and everything going on behind the scenes there. And then Mitch doesn't enter it in the books. And so I think that brought out, the skeptics of saying, well, that, somehow shows that it was fake or whatever. He totally backed away, and he's been pretty much invisible since then. But what would you say to those people regarding that and just, I guess, his reaction to that? Because you know him personally, right?
Right. Well, the reason he didn't enter it, he had it panel scored for possible entry in state records. The reason he did not enter it, based on an article that he wrote himself for Buck Facts, Commemorative Bucks of Michigan's magazine. Mitch wrote an article for that magazine about killing this deer. He explained that he was concerned, the controversy had reached gigantic proportions by the time that deer was panel measured. It was, I think in March, it was measured. It was 60 days was up in January, but there was some medical issues in his family. So I think it was March before it was panel measured. The controversy was full blown at that time. Mitch did not want to draw Commemorative Bucks of Michigan into that controversy, which would have happened had all he had to do was sign the score sheet and it would have been entered. He decided not to do so because of the controversy and not wanting to draw Commemorative Bucks of Michigan into it. Okay, and the rumors, many of the rumors were so ridiculous, and it hurt him deeply because he knew none of it was true, and it hurt him and his family. He had 2 boys he was raising at the time, and he didn't want it to continue. That's why he didn't enter it in state records, and he never planned on entering Boone and Crockett to begin with. Another thing is, Milo Hanson's deer was the world record at the time. It still is. And he was making money from show appearances, and the fact that there was publicity about Mitch shooting a potential world record was impacting his income, Milo Hanson's income, and his representatives. He was representing a number of companies when he was showing his deer. So representatives for Milo drew up an agreement for Mitch to sign, stating he would not enter his deer in Boone and Crockett records as long as Milo's deer was a world record. Mitch signed that willingly because he didn't plan on entering it to begin with. Some people think the fact that he signed that agreement indicates that there was something fishy.
Admission of guilt
or
something. Yeah.
But he never planned on it to begin with. So there was no reason why he wouldn't sign it. He wasn't going to enter it, bottom line.
Okay, so here's where we usually have a high IQ moment. But in this episode, it didn't seem to work so well, so I'll take a second to share a couple things with you. First, thanks for being a listener, and as we approach 1 year, I really do appreciate your support. So please follow, like, and share this with friends you think will benefit. And if you get value out of this podcast, consider being a Patreon and financially contributing to help keep this going. It does cost money, and you can help in that way. You can check out that below and how you can contribute at many different levels. And if you struggle to be consistent year after year on the top deer where you hunt, our new small group might be for you. Members learn the proven surgical hunting method that I teach, that anyone can apply to really up their odds and transform into a consistent and deadly hunter wherever they hunt. This 6-month interactive group includes coaching to help you apply these strategies right where you hunt and is truly an investment in yourself as a hunter. Email me with questions and how to sign up for your spot in this limited member group, and check out our other services also linked below. Okay, and now back to the podcast with several clips from an interview by Deer and Deer Hunting magazine editor Dan Schmidt with John Eberhart, which is on the Deer and Deer Hunting podcast. John also knew Mitch from CBM and seminars they would do at different outdoor shows. In this video, contrast John Eberhart's interpretation to the same shed that John Omer saw, and also his take on Mitch not wanting recognition.
Beliefs about that deer.
Not being real? 100%. Yeah, I'm not changing my mind on that whatsoever.
And well, I know the reasons why, but why do you double down on it?
Because I am very cognizant of the situations. I knew Mitch. I've done seminars on stage with Mitch before.
How many years ago?
That would have been in the mid-'90s,
Yeah.
probably.
So we're not talking Johnny come lately. That you were there before this all went down.
Oh, yeah, and I was a scorer for CBM, and he was the scoring chairman. He actually signed my scoring certificate. So I know Mitch, and, presenting me with what would, I don't know if you remember that video, or that interview, bringing a block box with a shed of another deer that would have been a world record, which is a totally different frame than the one he actually shot years later.
Supposedly.
To have 2 world record class bucks come out of the Traverse City area in Michigan, which typically at that time, I think the biggest buck from that area was 151 inches.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken.
Out of 84 years.
Yeah, and that's gun, bow, everything.
Everything. For 84
even
years.
pickups. And then after the fact, when he lost all of his recognition, because at the first ATA show after he shot that buck, his pictures were everywhere, and because he wouldn't get it x-rayed, the next year he never got it entered as a world record. The antlers all of a sudden disappeared, the meats disappeared, they can't do DNA testing.
The antlers burned up in a fire.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden he goes out and shoots 4 more bucks, 25-inch inside spreads and bigger. That's absolutely impossible. I was at that one show, and it was at the Michigan Deer Expo, and he took me in the back room, and he pulled this big-ass 5-point shed out, and he told me, this is a 2-day-old shed. I picked this up 2 days after it shed, and I could tell just as soon as he picked the antler up out of the box, it was weather-checked, severely weather-checked, when he had tried to cover it up with some kind of a stain.
So explain, what is weather checking? Explain that.
Weather checking is when an antler is laying out and exposed to the elements for a long period of time.
White and chalky.
White and chalky,
Kinda
and it's got
split
little tiny cracks
in it.
running up it.
Was it?
I think it was a taxidermist manipulated set of antlers, and that's why he wouldn't get it x-rayed. I mean, there's no reason not to get it x-rayed other than the bone's not all real. There's no other reason to not get it x-rayed.
So what do you say to the people who say, well, he didn't want the recognition?
That is total BS. If he didn't want recognition, why would he have put all of his deer in the Michigan record book and have the state record Michigan deer?
All right, so in an effort to get an interview with Mitch and go beyond secondhand information, I thought I should ask him, which is always the best thing to do. Go right to the source if you can. So I knocked on Mitch's door. My intent, to be clear, was just to interview him, if possible, about his hunting techniques, since many people consider him to be a great hunter, and many people would love to hear that. It was not my intent to dig about the controversial 1998 buck. And Mitch, if you're listening, I would still like that and think a lot of people would benefit. But I can help clear up a rumor. So I knocked on Mitch's door, and there was a lot of glass missing from the door. There was some plywood behind it, and there was a spot he had for notes. No one came to the door, so I left Mitch a note to call me about an interview. I didn't get a call. I went back the next day just to try again and knocked on his door and noticed that the note was gone. So he did get the note. I also noticed, though, and I can clear up this rumor, that house, if that buck, that mount was there, that house did not have a fire. A fire, if that mount was there, did not ruin that mount. So that rumor can be cleared up. That was clear to me. Another interesting thing happened right after I left the note. I had a very small Instagram page, probably less than 100 followers at that time. And within a few hours of me leaving that note, a Instagram page called the Rompola Buck started following me, which might have been a coincidence, but I thought it was just kind of weird, right? I reached out to them, no feedback. And so that's where we are. I didn't get the interview, but definitely that rumor about the fire, not true at all. So, will we ever get all the answers? My guess is probably not. It is clear, as we all know, though, that we can't believe everything that we hear, like the fire rumor. But since this series is about controversies and solutions, I'm going to attempt to put out a solution, although it's probably not the one we all want, which is the end of the story, right? Despite our human love for a good story, to be drawn into unsolved mysteries, which is what this is, maybe our solution is right in front of our faces, that instead of taking sides on things we don't know or don't have firsthand information about, we take information as it is and admit that we don't know and may never know. I wasn't there, I can never be 100% sure, and that's maybe the best way to leave some things. Something to think about. I'm sure you have thoughts on it. Leave them in the comments below. And next time we wrap up the year with a compilation of our incredible guests this year, answering the question of the entire first season. What does it truly take to be a great hunter? You won't want to miss that final episode of year one, and I'll see you then.